They are men and women who were ordinary people until they heard the call of duty and answered it.
They left their families, their homes, and their lives, not for the recognition or fame or even the honor we give them today. They fought to protect our country, to maintain our way of life. We want to honor our veterans and remember the great deeds, and also salute those who are currently fighting for our freedom. When Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner almost 200 years ago, he called America the land of the free and the home of the brave. Those words are still true today. Throughout this nation's history, America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen have bravely answered the call to defend our freedom, to aid our friends and allies, and to turn back our enemies. Today we honor all our veterans who willingly placed their lives on the line for our freedom.
At this time, some of our staff and students would like to thank the veterans in their lives.
I want to thank my dad, James, and my aunt, Sarah, and my uncle, Justin, for serving in the Army and Air Force.
And I want to thank my grandpa, Ethan's great-grandpa, who served in the Navy, and my dad, Mike Sutton, who served in the Army.
I want to thank my dad, Sergeant Brady Lamb, for his 8 years of service in the United States Marine Corps.
We would like to thank our dad and grandpa for their service. Our grandpa, Robert Himrod, served 20 years in the Vietnam War in the Army branch in Vietnam.
My dad, James Himrod, served for 8 years as a sergeant with an airborne infantry unit in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I want to thank my cousin, Brian Stanisley, for the 9 years in the Army.
We would like to thank our son, Josh Pryor, for his service in the U.S. Coast Guard.
Josh is an E6 Petty Officer First Class Electrician's First Mate. He is looking forward to retirement in 2022 after 20 years of service with the Coast Guard, keeping our waters and lands safe, and we are looking forward to having him home. We are so proud of you and all you do for our family and our country. Thank you for your service, Josh.
I want to thank my son, Specialist Hunter Irwin, who's currently serving in the 82nd Airborne Division since 2017.
I want to thank my dad for his 22 years of service in the U.S. Navy for Chief Petty Officer Carlos Seguenza.
I want to say thank you to my husband, Captain Keith Vaselka, retired of the United States Air Force. Thank you for protecting us and protecting your country.
I'd like to thank my son, Daniel Wall, was in the Army with the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg, and did a tour in Iraq, and he's my hero. Thank you, Dan.
I want to thank my dad, Kyle Hausner, Master Sergeant in the Army, for his 20 years of service.
I'd like to thank my dad, Walter Mick, for serving for 4 years in the U.S. Navy.
I'd like to thank my aunt, Master Sergeant Melanie Foyt, for her 19 years in the Air Force. She's currently a senior NCO and works at a medical mental health clinic.
I want to thank my grandpa, Gary Sanders, who was in the Army and served during Desert Storm.
I want to say thank you to great-grandfather Ryan for fighting in the Korean War, and Grandpa Carlasio for fighting in World War II, and Uncle Malcolm for serving in the Air Force.
I want to thank my dad, Chad Taylor, for 4 years in the U.S. Navy. I'd also like to thank my Uncle Brian, who served 24 years as a Navy Seabee.
I'd like to thank my dad, retired Master Sergeant Philip Hayter, for his 20 years of service in the United States Air Force.
I'd like to thank our dad, Logan Stutz, for being in the Army. I would like to thank our Uncle Keith for serving in the Air Force. Thank you.
I want to thank my Uncle Jason Comerford for serving in the U.S. Army for 15 years.
I want to thank my Uncle Doug Philp, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Air Force, for his 4 years of service.
I want to thank my dad, an E7 Sergeant, John Brightson, for his 26 years in the Army.
Hey, I want to thank my dad, Tom Oliva, who served in the Air Force as a captain for 6 years, and he was stationed overseas. And eventually that's how he met my mom, and that's how we all wound up. So we're grateful for his service, and just because he's an amazing dad.
I want to thank my dad.
My husband, Sean Gill, Sergeant First Class in the Army National Guard. He's been serving for 18 years.
I'd like to thank both my grandpas, Jack Nas, for serving in the Navy, and my grandpa Robert Moore for serving in the Air Force. And I'd also like to thank both my uncles, Mark Nas, for serving in the Army, and Jason Moore for serving in the Air Force.
I'm here to thank 4 men who are part of my family who have served in the military. The first is my stepfather, Ted Sherwin, who served in the Navy from 1959 to 1965 and was a Quartermaster 3. The second is my husband's uncle, Hal Stacy, who served in the Army National Guard a total of 20 years as a captain. The third is my father-in-law, Larry Bales, who was a tech sergeant in Vietnam for the Air Force and served for a total of 14 years. And finally, I'd like to thank my father, Glenn Rice, who was a senior director for a classified radar assignment for the Air Force in Vietnam from 1967 to 1971. I was actually in Vietnam when I was born. He went in the Air Guard from 1973 to 1994 and retired after 27 years of service as a colonel. I'm very thankful for all 4 of these men in my life and want to thank all the men and women who serve our country and continue to fight for our freedoms.
It is important to remember the veterans are defending us 365 days a year.
The heroism that has been demonstrated time and again by veterans from the American Revolution to the global war on terrorism is sometimes unnoticed by those of us who enjoy the security that their sacrifice has provided.
Our debt to these heroes can never be repaid, but our gratitude and respect must last forever.
For many veterans, our nation was important enough to endure long separations from their families, miss the births of their children, freeze in sub-zero temperatures, bake in wild jungles, lose limbs, and far too often lose their lives.
We also cannot forget the families of our veterans, where lives were often interrupted with moving and relocating to new cities and new schools, away from supportive family and friends, along with the constant worrying for their loved one's safe return.
They too sacrificed for our country.
We can never fully repay our debt of gratitude to the more than 650,000 American service members who died in battle, or the 1.4 million who were wounded.
We can, however, recognize and thank the 25 million veterans still living today.
The words carved on the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. apply to the veterans of our world wars, Vietnam, and the Gulf War.
They read, "Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met."
These words apply to today's active service members, who are tomorrow's veterans, who are helping now to maintain peace throughout the world.
Today, it is our privilege to say thank you to America's veterans, to let them know that we appreciate them for their service and honor them for their sacrifices.
Thank you.
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 The price of freedom is high. We cannot afford to forget those willing to pay it.
We must celebrate America's veterans for keeping this nation the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you.
Before we end, Mr. Smith will play one final piece of music, Taps.
Taps was originally played to signal lights out during the Civil War, and later it became custom to be played at military funeral or ceremony to honor those servicemen and women who gave their lives.